So what we wanted to think about first was establishing good working relationships, setting up some ground rules so that both you and your students know when you're going to meet, what you're going to do when you meet, how regularly you're going to meet, how accessible you can be to each other, what kind of work is expected of both of you on both sides, things to do with time, the expectations of progress reports and transfer documents, and then the final examination. Other things to do with the responsibilities. Who's responsible for developing research questions? Who's responsible for carrying out the research? Who's responsible for the writing? At this stage, managing expectations is the key to being able to get along well with the project and to being able to get along well together, so that nobody's left in any kind of confused state about how much you can do or the other supervisors can do and how much is expected of the student. I think this is a developing experience which we need to have good ground rules for right at the beginning, so that there's an openness of discussion should these working relationships not work too well or need to be changed over time because of the increasing independence of the student, which is what we hope will happen. So we're going to think a little bit about the ground rules and the working behaviours, the way in which you'll interact together through this learning development experience. We're also going to think about this along the lines of it being a personal, professional relationship. How are you going to get on with each other? How are you going to talk to each other? How will you engage in understanding, interpreting feedback together? So the things that you interact with the student with on paper, through the internet, through email, perhaps also through discussion. How are you going to have a free and open discussion about what that means and what that means they're going to do and what that means you can help them with? So it's about regulations, it's about interactions, it's about professional, personal relationships, and it's about the learning development in relation to the project. So we think quite a lot here right at the beginning about how do you help students establish this effective working relationship in which you know when work is going to come in, you have enough time to respond to it, you can respond to it in a dialogue on the work and then with the student, that you have agendas that you can set for each meeting so that you know what each of you wants to talk about, what you want to look at. And so that you have a certain mutual accessibility which isn't overwhelming. Some students are needier than others, and if we don't put some of these ground rules in place, they might be at your door every 5 minutes, being highly dependent and asking you some quite small questions. On the other hand, we also need to have the flexibility so that should they get stuck and not understand what they're doing, get intellectually stuck or just stuck in the middle of an experiment or in a piece of data collection in the actual process of the work, that they feel comfortable enough to come and discuss this with you. Making this the right kind of relationship and the right kind of rules at the start enables that free flow of ideas and that dialogue interaction which helps them construct knowledge and helps both of you not to feel overwhelmed and silenced. Research has shown that sometimes students from international contexts who are speaking a different language to you and are used to a different kind of situation and way of relating perhaps to somebody in authority might find it more difficult to ask specific and sometimes quite simple questions about their ongoing work. So maybe being more sensitive to that kind of cultural difference at the beginning and asking them what will work for them, as well as what will work for you, of course. And some students, perhaps from other learning contexts, also demand a lot of us, are there all the time expecting a lot of work on their work. While this is manageable at the beginning, because some of the research also shows that the supervision process is quite hands-on to start with, because everyone's learning how to work together and what's expected at this level. It should be a gradual process of handing over the responsibility to the students so that they become more independent. Students who are just left to make it up for themselves, though, usually flounder and find it very difficult, and many of them leave. So we do need good ground rules, good working behaviours, and accessibility and the opportunity to talk to each other if circumstances change, should we want a different kind of interaction. So some of that is about getting going in this personal, professional interaction. And some of it is also, right at the beginning, about helping students to devise the right kind of project for them. This is quite complicated because every project is a bit different. Even if you're running a large funded project in the sciences, for instance, and you want the students to fulfill the terms of what's rather like a contract so that you can complete this project, they still have to develop an element of the research which they're going to own themselves. So at that end, we have a funded project and expected outcomes. And at another end, with, for instance, a humanities student, they'll be coming in with their own ideas and their own questions right at the beginning. In each instance, what our role is to help them develop a clear research question or a hypothesis to answer through their research. And from that question or hypothesis, to come up with a title being more of a statement, and the question or a hypothesis being something which explores and asks questions about the field of study. That process isn't simple. It takes a very long time, as does the writing of a proposal. So in these early days, we're having quite complex conceptual discussions with the students about their ideas, about the concepts in the work they're going to be carrying out in their research, and about how they're going to be going about that research. So we're thinking about the research questions, and we're thinking about conceptual frameworks, the frameworks of concepts and theories which are going to underpin and drive their work. And some of this is work they might have done at a different level previously. It's certainly going to be different with each student, and I think it's quite intellectually taxing, especially at the early stages. And so they're going to probably need models, examples from other people's research questions and their conceptual frameworks, and models of writing as they start to do both the research and they begin their writing. We also need, I think, at this stage to fully understand the regulations of the university and what's expected when and what it should look like from each of the students. So we're dealing then along the three dimensions of institutional, where we're thinking about regulations and expectations and times and dates and amounts of interactions. We're thinking about the learning development, where they're coming up with questions and we're helping them modify them so that they're actually askable and hypotheses that are actually doable. And they're thinking also about how they might do this and how they might put all this into a proposal. So I think that's about learning development. And the third area is about the personal dimension, where we're learning to interact with each other, relating to ground rules, contracts and agendas, so that we can continue a long-term working relationship with each other.